The strangest thing about heroes is that sometimes they look exactly like the people everyone else is afraid of. Snow pushed sideways against the diner windows as if winter itself had grown restless outside. The neon sign above Cedar Ridge Diner flickered softly against the dark Colorado highway, throwing red light across patches of old snow piled near the parking lot. Inside, the smell of hot coffee, grilled onions, and fresh pie drifted through warm air, while country music played low from an old radio near the register. Most nights looked exactly the same in Cedar Ridge. Truck drivers stopping for late meals. Retired locals trading stories over coffee. Families too tired to cook after long workdays. But tonight felt different somehow, though nobody inside could explain why. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was the silence coming from the man sitting alone near the far corner booth. Ethan Walker had been there almost an hour, barely speaking, nursing the same black coffee while snow melted slowly from the shoulders of his faded military coat. He sat with the kind of stillness people noticed without understanding. Not nervous, not angry, just quiet in a way that made strangers curious. Beside him, stretched calmly beneath the booth table, rested a large black and tan German shepherd with unusually alert eyes. Ranger never slept in public places. Not fully. His ears twitched every few moments, eyes calmly tracking movements around the diner without appearing nervous. Protective without threatening. Present without demanding attention. Ethan occasionally rested one weathered hand against the dog's neck, absent-mindedly scratching behind one ear before staring back through the diner window into the storm outside. Nobody in Cedar Ridge knew much about him. Some people claimed he rented an old cabin near Pine Ridge Trail. Others said he fixed generators and heaters for neighbors who could not afford repairs. Most only knew he always paid in cash, tipped well, and never stayed long enough for conversation. Another coffee? Came a soft voice. Ethan looked up slowly. Lily Harper balanced a fresh pot near her waist, strands of blonde hair slipping loose from a tired ponytail after what had clearly been a long shift. She looked no older than 22. Ethan nodded once. Thank you. He always said thank you. Always quietly. Always sincere. Lily smiled politely while refilling his mug. You and your dog picked a bad night to be out. Ethan glanced briefly toward the storm. Seen worse. Ranger lifted his head suddenly. Just slightly. One ear turning toward the diner kitchen before settling again. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. He always noticed Ranger. Near the front counter, a loud voice interrupted the calm atmosphere. Hey, sweetheart, I asked for fries 10 minutes ago. The man saying it wore an expensive winter jacket, and the kind of expression that suggested patience had never been part of his personality. Mid-50s maybe. Loud enough to make sure everybody heard him. Lily apologized quickly while balancing plates between tables. I am sorry, sir. Kitchen is backed up because of the storm. He scoffed dramatically. Not my problem. Ethan lowered his eyes toward his coffee again. He had learned long ago that some storms happened indoors too. A few minutes later, Lily hurried past carrying too many plates at once. A child bumped lightly into her near the aisle. One glass slipped. Then another. The tray tilted sharply. Dishes crashed loudly across the diner floor. The sound cut through the room like shattered silence. Conversation stopped instantly. Lily froze. Face pale. Embarrassment arriving faster than breath. Oh my God. I am so sorry, she whispered, crouching quickly toward broken glass. The loud customer stood abruptly. Unbelievable. Ethan moved before thinking. Quietly. Calmly. He stepped from his booth and crouched near the mess. Easy, he said softly. You will cut your hand. Lily looked startled. Ethan carefully reached for nearby napkins while moving broken pieces aside. Ranger stood too now, calm beside him, watching quietly. But the loud man frowned immediately. What exactly are you doing? Ethan barely looked up. Helping. Helping, the man repeated louder. Looks more like intimidation to me. Several heads turned. Lily blinked in confusion. No, sir, he is just... You people saw that dog? The man interrupted, voice climbing. Big military dog standing over everybody. Guy comes over here acting strange. Ranger remained perfectly still, though his eyes shifted briefly toward the kitchen again. Ethan stood slowly. Nobody is bothering anyone. Calm voice. Low voice. Controlled voice. Somehow that only irritated the man more. Sure sounds threatening to me. 10 minutes later, red and blue lights reflected against diner windows. Officer Daniel Briggs stepped inside, brushing snow from his shoulders, expression already tired from weather and night shifts. He scanned the room once before eyes settled on Ethan. Quiet man. Big dog. Military coat. Standing near upset customer. Ethan said nothing. Ranger sat silently beside him. The loud customer pointed immediately. That is him. Briggs approached carefully. Sir, I need to ask what is going on here. Ethan answered simply. Nothing now. Ranger stood slowly beside him, calm but alert, gaze briefly turning once more toward the diner kitchen as though listening to something nobody else could hear. Officer Daniel Briggs stood near the diner entrance, brushing melted snow from his jacket, while the room settled into an uneasy silence around him. Outside, winter wind pushed hard against the windows, rattling the glass every few moments like the storm had not finished making itself known. Inside, warm air suddenly felt thinner. Ethan Walker stood calmly near the broken dishes, one hand resting loosely near Ranger's collar, while Lily Harper nervously wiped trembling fingers against her apron. Briggs looked from Ethan to the German Shepherd, then toward the irritated customer standing near the register with crossed arms and visible frustration. Sir says there was some kind of disturbance, Briggs said carefully, voice calm but cautious. Ethan answered simply. There was an accident. Nothing more. The loud customer shook his head immediately. That is not true. Guy came over acting strange. Big military dog, making people uncomfortable. Ranger remained perfectly still beside Ethan, though one ear turned sharply toward the diner kitchen again. Ethan noticed immediately. Quietly. The dog's breathing had changed. Slightly faster. Subtle enough most people would miss it. Ethan never missed Ranger's signals. Not after 6 years together. Briggs stepped a little closer. Sir, I need you to keep the dog under control. Ethan nodded once. He is under control. Ranger suddenly shifted position, standing straighter now. Eyes locked toward the hallway near the kitchen. Ethan followed the direction briefly before looking back at Briggs. Something felt wrong. Small things. Tiny details. A faint vibration somewhere beneath the floor. A strange metallic sound carried softly through the diner walls. Barely noticeable. But Ranger noticed. Ranger always noticed. Ranger, Ethan said quietly. The dog did not relax. Instead, his ears lifted higher. Body stiffening. You seeing this? The loud customer asked nervously. That dog is about to snap. Ethan shook his head once. No. He is trying to tell me something. Briggs frowned. Tell you what exactly? Ethan glanced toward the kitchen hallway again. Not sure yet. Lily shifted awkwardly near the counter. Actually, she hesitated. Kitchen has been acting weird all night. Everyone turned slightly. Lily lowered her voice. One of the cooks said he smelled something strange earlier. Kind of metallic maybe. The loud customer scoffed loudly. Come on. You are really listening to this. Ranger suddenly stood and moved 3 slow steps toward the hallway before stopping again. Watching. Waiting. Ethan's expression changed just slightly. Not fear. Focus. The kind of focus built through years nobody inside the diner knew anything about. How long has the kitchen smelled strange? Ethan asked Lily quietly. Maybe an hour, she admitted. But storms mess with everything around here. Briggs crossed his arms. Sir, let us stay on topic. Ethan looked toward him calmly. I think this is the topic. Ranger gave a low sound in his throat. Not aggressive. Not angry. Uneasy. Protective. A small girl sitting near a booth by the window tugged softly on her father's sleeve. Daddy, she whispered. The dog looked scared. Her father smiled nervously. He is probably just cold. No, she said quietly. He keeps looking over there. Ranger paced once now. Slow. Controlled. Then stopped again facing the kitchen. Ethan knew the pattern. Ranger did not panic. Ever. During storms. Traffic accidents. Fire alarms. Nothing. If Ranger acted uneasy, there was always a reason. Briggs reached slowly toward his radio. Look, sir, I understand you care about your dog, but I still need some answers here. Ethan remained calm. I was helping clean broken glass. Customer says otherwise. Customer is wrong. The loud man pointed angrily. See? Hostile already. Ethan sighed softly, tired more than frustrated. Outside, snow blew harder against diner windows. Neon lights flickered overhead. Somewhere deeper in the building came a strange clanking sound. Faint, almost hidden beneath country music from the old radio. Ranger immediately turned toward it. Staring hard now. Lily looked nervous. That sound again, she whispered. Briggs finally noticed the tension shifting through the room. Conversations had gone quieter. Several customers looked uneasy now. One elderly couple exchanged uncertain glances. A teenager lowered his phone after recording earlier drama. Ethan looked directly at Briggs. Calm voice. No anger. No panic. Officer, I think something is wrong in the back. Briggs hesitated. Based on what? Ethan looked down briefly toward Ranger. Based on him. The loud customer laughed under his breath. You cannot seriously be taking orders from a dog. Ethan did not answer right away. Ranger suddenly pulled lightly toward the hallway again, nose twitching now. More alert than before. Ethan lowered one hand against the dog's neck. Quiet reassurance. Listen, Ethan said carefully. Ranger worked beside me for years. He does not react like this unless something matters. Briggs studied Ethan longer this time. Something about the man standing calmly in front of him felt different from what he first assumed. No nervousness. No aggression. Just certainty. Then suddenly one of the kitchen staff stepped into the hallway, holding the wall for balance. Pale. Sweating slightly. Anybody else feeling weird? The cook asked weakly. Kind of dizzy back there. The diner fell silent again. Ranger stood completely still now, eyes fixed on the hallway as though waiting for everyone else to catch up. Ethan looked once more toward Officer Briggs. You might want to start taking this seriously. And before we continue, if stories like this keep you watching until the very end, do not forget to like and subscribe so you do not miss more unforgettable stories ahead. The diner grew quieter after the cook stepped unsteadily into the hallway. Outside, snow continued piling against parked trucks while wind pushed hard across the empty highway. But inside Cedar Ridge Diner, something heavier settled into the room. Uncertainty. Ranger stood perfectly still near Ethan now, body tense in a way only someone who truly knew the dog would recognize. Not fear. Readiness. The German Shepherd's ears stayed fixed toward the kitchen hallway, nose twitching faintly every few seconds, as if the air carried something nobody else had fully noticed yet. Officer Daniel Briggs glanced toward the pale kitchen worker leaning against the wall. You okay? He asked. The cook rubbed his forehead slowly. Just dizzy, he muttered. Thought maybe I skipped lunch or something. Lily Harper frowned. Tom said earlier something smelled strange near the ovens, she admitted quietly. Like metal maybe. The loud customer near the register crossed his arms harder. Everybody is overreacting. His voice sounded smaller now though, less confident than before. Even he had noticed the mood changing. Ethan remained calm. Calm enough to almost seem detached, though inside old instincts had already begun arranging details into patterns he trusted. Strange smell. Dizziness. Metallic sound. Ranger refusing to settle. Small clues rarely stayed small. Ethan crouched slowly near Ranger, resting one hand against the dog's shoulder. Easy, he said quietly. Ranger glanced briefly toward him before staring back toward the kitchen. Ethan understood immediately. Something was escalating. Briggs noticed the exchange. You really trust that dog that much? Ethan looked up. More than most people. The answer landed quietly in the diner. Honest. Matter of fact. No attitude. No drama. Just truth. Near the booth by the window, the little girl who noticed Ranger earlier kept watching carefully. Daddy, she whispered again. He looks worried. Her father finally stopped dismissing it. Ranger did look worried. Not aggressive. Not restless. Focused. Like he had been waiting for everyone else to understand something important. Another faint clanking sound echoed from deeper inside the diner. Soft. Metallic. Then came a flicker overhead. Lights dimmed briefly before glowing back again. Several customers shifted uneasily. Lily swallowed. That keeps happening too, she said quietly. Briggs finally turned fully toward Ethan. What exactly do you think is going on? Ethan stood slowly. I do not know yet. He paused briefly. But Ranger worked around dangerous situations for years. Briggs frowned slightly. Military. Ethan nodded once. Explosives. Environmental hazards. Search work. The room seemed to shift around that information. Small details suddenly looking different. The calm posture. The silence. The dog's discipline. Even the old military coat no longer felt random. The loud customer muttered under his breath, but noticeably quieter now. Ranger suddenly moved again. 3 quick steps toward the kitchen hallway before stopping hard. Nose lifted, ears forward. Then something unexpected happened. The German Shepherd let out one short bark. Sharp. Controlled. Not loud. but unusual enough that Ethan's expression changed instantly. Ranger almost never barked indoors. Not unless absolutely necessary. Ethan looked directly toward Briggs now. Serious. That is not normal. Briggs hesitated. What does it mean? Ethan answered immediately. It means something changed. Another employee stepped nervously from the kitchen. The fryer keeps shutting off, she said. And somebody said the back storage room smells weird. Lily looked pale suddenly. Oh no. Ethan stepped carefully toward the hallway before stopping himself. Briggs instinctively held out a hand. Hold on. Ethan looked back calmly. Officer, I think we should clear people out. The loud customer laughed nervously. For what? Some weird smell. Ethan's voice stayed low. Controlled. Because if Ranger is reacting like this, I would rather be wrong outside than right in here. Nobody answered immediately. Outside, snow swept harder against windows. Inside, even the coffee mugs suddenly felt quieter somehow. Then Tom, the cook from earlier, leaned harder against the counter. His face had gone pale. Actually, he said weakly, voice slower now. I really do not feel good. He stumbled slightly. Lily rushed forward. Tom, Ranger barked once more. This time louder. Sharp enough to cut clean through the room. Ethan moved without hesitation, stepping closer toward the kitchen entrance while keeping one hand near Ranger. Stay with me, he told the dog quietly. Briggs stepped in front of him again, uncertainty written clearly across his face now. Torn between procedure and instinct. Ethan lowered his voice. You asked what was happening. He looked briefly toward Ranger, then back at Briggs. This dog has saved my life before. Silence settled for half a second. Long enough for another strange metallic sound to echo somewhere in the back. Long enough for several customers to exchange nervous glances. Long enough for the room to stop feeling normal. Then Ranger suddenly pulled harder toward the hallway than before, claws scraping softly across tile, as though urgency had finally arrived. The sound of Ranger's claws scraping across the diner floor seemed louder than the storm outside. Not frantic, not panicked, purposeful. The German shepherd pulled harder toward the hallway leading to the kitchen, muscles tight beneath dark fur, nose lifting slightly into the air again, as though something invisible had suddenly become impossible to ignore. Ethan Walker followed the movement instantly with his eyes. 6 years beside Ranger had taught him something simple. The dog never overreacted. Never guessed. Ranger noticed what others missed. Officer Daniel Briggs finally stepped aside, uncertainty replacing earlier suspicion. All right, he said carefully. Tell me exactly what you think is happening. Ethan kept his voice calm. Could be gas. Could be electrical. Could be pressure buildup somewhere. He glanced briefly toward Ranger. Whatever it is, he smells something wrong. The loud customer near the register folded his arms tighter. You are all seriously letting a dog run the diner now. Nobody answered him this time. Too many small things had started adding up. The flickering lights overhead. The metallic smell. The cook nearly collapsing. The strange clanking noises coming from deeper inside the building. Even Martha Collins, the diner owner who had been working quietly near the register most of the night, looked uneasy now. We had maintenance out here last month, she admitted softly. They said one of the old gas lines near storage might need replacing soon. Ethan looked at her immediately. Did they replace it? Martha hesitated. Not yet. Ranger suddenly gave another short bark. Sharper now. More urgent. Then he turned his head directly toward the back hallway and froze again. Ethan lowered one hand gently against the dog's shoulder. Easy. Ranger barely moved. Eyes locked ahead. Waiting. Listening. Somewhere behind the kitchen doors came another strange sound. Metal shifting against metal. Then silence. Then a soft hiss, almost hidden beneath the hum of refrigerators. Lily Harper swallowed hard. I heard that, she whispered. Briggs finally reached for his radio. Dispatch, possible building hazard at Cedar Ridge Diner. Requesting fire response for precaution. Ethan appreciated the word precaution. Calm language kept people calm. Panic rarely helped anybody. We should start getting people outside, Ethan said quietly. Briggs hesitated only a second before nodding. All right, everybody, he called out, trying to sound casual. Just need folks to step outside for a few minutes while we check something. Nobody moved at first. The loud customer laughed nervously again. Over what? A weird smell. Then Ranger did something Ethan had only seen a handful of times. The German shepherd let out one low growl. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Warning. Ethan's stomach tightened slightly. Ranger only made that sound when danger stopped feeling distant. Ethan stepped closer toward Briggs. Voice lower now. Serious. Officer. Briggs looked up. What? Ethan held his gaze. We do not have a few minutes. Something in Ethan's tone finally landed. No dramatics. No fear. Just certainty earned somewhere Briggs suddenly realized he knew nothing about. Briggs turned quickly. Everybody outside now, he said louder. Please. Right now. Chairs scraped against tile. Conversations rose nervously. Families gathered coats. Someone grabbed leftovers. The little girl by the window looked relieved for reasons she could not explain. The dog knew. She whispered quietly to her father. Ethan moved automatically toward the kitchen entrance. Ranger already pulling forward again. Briggs stepped beside him. Where are you going? Ethan glanced toward the hallway, making sure nobody is still back there. Briggs frowned. You are not law enforcement. Ethan looked at him calmly. No, then glanced briefly toward Ranger. But he already found the problem. Martha suddenly gasped. Frank. Everyone turned. Her face had gone pale. Frank is still in storage counting inventory. Ethan did not hesitate. How far back? Past the freezer, Martha answered quickly. Near the old supply room. Briggs exhaled sharply. All right. He looked toward Ethan, uncertainty still visible. You stay behind me. Ethan did not argue, though both men quietly understood Ranger was already leading. They moved carefully down the hallway while lights flickered again overhead. The metallic smell grew stronger. Strange now. Sharp. Wrong. Ranger stopped near the kitchen doorway, nose lifted high. One paw raised slightly, waiting for Ethan's signal. Ethan crouched briefly beside him, calm hand against thick fur. Find him. Ranger moved immediately, quick but controlled. Past ovens, past stacked boxes, through narrow hallways carrying the smell of grease and old coffee. Somewhere deeper inside came another faint clanking sound followed by a weak cough. Ethan looked toward Briggs. Did you hear that? Briggs nodded once. Both men moved faster now. Outside the diner windows, snow continued falling hard against the dark Colorado night, while customers gathered nervously near patrol lights in the parking lot, unaware something much more serious might already be building inside. The farther Ethan Walker moved into the back of Cedar Ridge Diner, the more wrong the air began to feel. Not dramatic, not obvious, just wrong in the quiet way dangerous things often arrived. Warmer than it should have been, heavy somehow, metallic. Ranger moved quickly ahead, nails tapping against old tile before slowing near the kitchen doorway. His ears stood high, body tense but disciplined, nose lifting toward the ceiling vents every few seconds. Ethan trusted that look more than most warning systems. Officer Daniel Briggs stayed close behind, flashlight moving carefully across narrow hallways lined with food supplies and old metal shelves. How bad do you think this is? Briggs asked quietly. Ethan did not answer immediately. He listened first. Somewhere behind humming refrigerators came a soft hiss. Faint, intermittent, then silence. Then again. Ranger stopped suddenly beside the storage room entrance and gave one sharp bark. Controlled. Certain. Ethan looked toward the door. Frank, he called calmly. No answer. Then came a weak cough somewhere deeper inside. Briggs reacted immediately. Frank, he shouted louder. Another cough answered back. Weak this time. Ethan stepped carefully through the storage room doorway. Shelves packed with canned vegetables and flour bags stretched along the walls while one overhead light flickered softly above them. Near the back corner, beside stacked boxes of coffee supplies, an older man sat slumped awkwardly against the wall, rubbing one hand against his forehead. Frank, Ethan said, kneeling quickly beside him. Can you stand? Frank looked disoriented. Pale. Sweating. Just got dizzy, he muttered weakly. Thought maybe I skipped dinner. Ethan glanced briefly toward Ranger. The dog stood frozen near the back wall now, staring directly toward an old utility pipe running behind storage shelves. Nose twitching harder than before. Ethan followed the direction immediately. Then he smelled it too. Faint but unmistakable now. Natural gas. Small leak maybe. Maybe worse. Ethan stood quickly. Officer. Briggs looked over. Ethan kept his voice calm but serious. Gas line. Briggs stiffened immediately. You sure? Ethan nodded once toward Ranger. He found it before I did. Ranger stepped closer to the utility pipe and sat down hard. Still staring. Waiting. Confirming. Ethan crouched beside Frank again. Need you standing now. Frank blinked slowly. What is happening? Ethan helped him gently to his feet. We are leaving. No panic. No rushed explanations. Just movement. Controlled movement saved lives. Panic only slowed people down. Briggs reached for his radio immediately. Dispatch, confirmed gas issue. Evacuating building. Request fire department now. Outside, snow continued falling hard while customers stood clustered beneath patrol lights and winter jackets, uneasy but mostly calm. Through diner windows they could see shapes moving inside, but no one fully understood how serious things had become. Martha Collins stood near the front entrance wringing nervous hands together. Frank, she asked Lily for the 10th time. Lily kept glancing nervously toward the back hallway. They will get him. Then suddenly Ranger appeared first. Calm but purposeful, walking ahead of Ethan and Briggs through the hallway like he knew exactly where everyone needed to go. Ethan supported Frank carefully while Briggs cleared the path. Everybody stay back from the building, Briggs called firmly. Move farther toward the parking lot. The loud customer from earlier looked shaken now. Wait, this is real. Nobody answered him. The answer already lived in the expressions around him. Frank coughed softly while Martha rushed toward him. You scared me half to death, she whispered shakily. Ethan barely paused. Ranger had stopped again near the diner entrance, staring back toward the hallway. Waiting. Ethan noticed immediately. Something unfinished lingered in the dog's posture. What is it? Briggs asked quietly. Ethan narrowed his eyes slightly. Ranger rarely hesitated unless something remained unresolved. Then faintly, almost hidden beneath the storm outside, came a sound. Metal tapping softly, followed by something else. A weak voice. Martha's expression changed instantly. Oh no. Ethan looked at her. Who? She covered her mouth briefly. Kevin. Who is Kevin? Briggs asked quickly. Dishwasher kid, Martha answered nervously. 17 years old. He was cleaning the freezer room earlier. Ethan looked back toward the diner immediately. Ranger already had. The German Shepherd stood perfectly still facing the hallway once again, ears high, body tense. Briggs exhaled sharply. Fire department is still 10 minutes out in this storm. Ethan quietly removed his heavy coat and handed it toward Martha without hesitation. Keep Frank warm. Briggs frowned. What are you doing? Ethan looked toward Ranger, then back at the officer. Calm expression, steady voice. We are not leaving somebody inside. For the first time all night, Briggs did not argue. Because standing there beneath flashing patrol lights and blowing snow, something about Ethan no longer looked like the quiet stranger everyone had judged an hour ago. He looked like somebody who already knew exactly what came next. Snow swirled harder across the diner parking lot as red and blue lights reflected against ice-covered pavement. Wind pushed sharp through coats and scarves while customers stood farther back now, grouped together beneath the uneasy comfort of patrol headlights. Nobody complained anymore. Nobody questioned whether the danger was real. Something in Ethan Walker's expression had changed the atmosphere entirely. Calm certainty had a way of spreading faster than panic. Ranger stood beside the diner entrance, muscles tight beneath thick fur, staring toward the dark hallway inside as though the building itself had begun whispering warnings only he could hear. Officer Daniel Briggs stepped closer beside Ethan, snow collecting across his shoulders. You really planning to go back in there? He asked quietly. Ethan nodded once. There is still a kid inside. Briggs exhaled slowly, glancing toward the diner windows. The storm outside suddenly felt safer than what waited beyond those doors. All right, he said finally. I am coming too. Ethan looked toward him for half a second. No argument. No pride. Just agreement. Ranger moved first the moment Ethan touched the diner handle. Back inside, warmth no longer felt comforting. The air carried a sharper edge now. Heavier. The metallic smell had grown stronger. Somewhere deeper inside came another faint hiss followed by a soft knocking sound that echoed strangely through the empty building. Neon lights flickered overhead. One bulb buzzed weakly near the hallway ceiling. Ranger moved quickly ahead, but never rushed. Focused. Measured. Leading. Ethan followed close behind, while Briggs kept flashlight beams moving carefully across floors and doorways. Kevin, Briggs called out. Police department. Call back if you hear me. Silence answered. Then faintly, almost swallowed by the hum of refrigerators. A weak voice. Back here. Ethan turned immediately. Ranger already had. The German Shepherd moved quickly down the narrow hallway, toward the freezer storage room. Near the door, Ranger stopped and barked once sharply. Ethan grabbed the handle. Locked. Briggs stepped forward. "Kevin, I am stuck," came the weak voice again. Door jammed. Ethan crouched briefly, studying the old metal frame. One side had shifted unevenly, warped slightly from cold and age. "Can you move back from the door?" Ethan asked calmly. "Yeah," Kevin answered weakly. Ethan looked toward Briggs. "Help me here." Together they pulled hard against the handle. Metal groaned softly, but barely moved. Ranger paced once near the doorway, whining quietly now. Urgency rising. Then came another sound somewhere deeper inside the building. A sharp metallic pop, followed by silence. Ethan's eyes narrowed immediately. "Again," he said. Both men pulled harder. This time the old freezer door shifted open several inches with a sharp screech. Cold air rushed out instantly. Kevin stood inside wrapped tightly in his thin work jacket, pale and visibly shaken. Maybe 17 years old, young enough to still look surprised by fear. "Come on," Ethan said calmly. Kevin stumbled forward slightly. Ranger immediately stepped beside him, nudging gently against the teenager's leg as though confirming he was okay. Kevin looked down wide-eyed. "Your dog found me." Ethan gave the smallest nod. He usually does. Then suddenly the lights overhead dimmed hard, flickering twice. Somewhere behind the kitchen came a louder metallic bang, followed by a deep rumbling sound beneath the floor. Briggs looked up immediately. "We need to go." Nobody argued. Ranger had already turned toward the exit. Fast now. Still controlled. Ethan stayed beside Kevin while Briggs moved slightly ahead, clearing the path. The metallic smell felt stronger than before. Uncomfortable now. Wrong. Every instinct Ethan carried from older years whispered the same thing. Time mattered. Near the kitchen entrance, Ranger suddenly stopped again. Ears forward. Frozen. Ethan followed his gaze toward the back utility hallway. A storage shelf had partially shifted sideways near one of the pipes. Beneath it, something hissed louder now. Briggs noticed too. "Gas line," he muttered quietly. Ethan looked once. Calculated. Then shook his head slightly. No time. Outside the diner windows, Martha paced nervously near flashing lights while Lily wrapped blankets around customers waiting in the cold. The little girl near the window earlier stood beside her father watching the diner doors without blinking. Then suddenly they opened. Ranger appeared first through blowing snow. Then Ethan. Then Briggs beside Kevin. Relief moved visibly through the crowd. Martha covered her mouth. "Kevin," she cried, rushing forward. The teenager looked shaken, but okay. Briggs barely had time to step away before a deep thud echoed from inside the diner. Not an explosion. More like pressure releasing somewhere heavy. Windows rattled softly. Several people gasped. Ethan turned calmly toward the building, snow collecting across his hair. Ranger stood beside him perfectly still now. Watching. Waiting. Briggs looked over slowly, breathing harder than before. "You knew," he said quietly. Ethan looked down briefly toward Ranger, then back toward the diner. "No," he answered softly. He knew. Snow kept falling across Cedar Ridge long after the danger inside the diner had passed. Emergency vehicles lined the roadside now, red lights reflecting across icy pavement, while firefighters moved carefully around the building checking old gas lines and damaged utility pipes. Nobody spoke very loudly anymore. The storm outside suddenly felt smaller than the strange weight settling over everyone gathered in the parking lot. Because an hour earlier most of them had looked at Ethan Walker like he did not belong there. A quiet man in a worn military coat. A stranger with a large German shepherd. Somebody suspicious. Somebody easy to misunderstand. Now people looked at him differently, though Ethan himself seemed completely unaware of it. He stood farther back near the edge of the parking lot, shoulders dusted with snow, quietly watching firefighters work while Ranger sat calmly beside him. The German shepherd finally looked relaxed for the first time all night. Still alert, but peaceful now, like whatever silent burden he had carried inside the diner had finally eased. Nearby, Kevin sat wrapped in blankets beside Martha Collins near the back of an ambulance. Pale but smiling weakly now. "You really came back for me," he said quietly when Ethan passed nearby. Ethan gave the smallest shrug. "Could not leave you there." Kevin looked down briefly. Most people would have. Ethan did not answer, because sometimes kindness felt easier without words attached to it. Officer Daniel Briggs stood several feet away speaking quietly with one of the firefighters. Every few moments his eyes drifted back toward Ethan. Something about the night no longer sat right with him. Or maybe something about himself did not. Earlier he had walked into Cedar Ridge Diner expecting trouble. One irritated customer. One suspicious stranger. One large military dog. Simple assumptions. Simple mistakes. But standing there now watching firefighters confirm a damaged gas line near storage, Briggs realized something uncomfortable. The quiet man he nearly treated like a threat had probably saved every person standing outside in the snow. A firefighter approached Briggs holding a clipboard. "You got lucky," the man said quietly. "Another 15, maybe 20 minutes, and pressure buildup could have gotten ugly." Briggs glanced instinctively toward Ethan. Lucky did not feel like the right word. Not exactly. Ranger shifted beside Ethan suddenly, ears lifting again, though only slightly this time. A little girl from earlier approached carefully through the snow wearing pink mittens and a winter hat too large for her head. Her father followed behind, looking uncertain. "Excuse me," the man said gently. Ethan turned slowly. The little girl looked directly at Ranger first. "I told Daddy your dog knew," she said proudly. Ranger looked at her quietly before lowering his head enough for her to pet him. Ethan gave the smallest smile. Almost invisible. "You were paying attention," he said softly. The father looked embarrassed. "I wanted to thank you," he admitted. "Honestly, I judged things wrong in there." Ethan shook his head lightly. Everybody was trying to protect people. Strange answer. Kind answer. One Briggs heard from across the parking lot. No blame. No bitterness. No anger. Just grace. Briggs found himself walking over before thinking too much about it. Snow crunched softly beneath his boots. "Mr. Walker," he said carefully. Ethan looked up. Briggs hesitated for a moment longer than expected. "I owe you an apology." Ethan studied him quietly. Not uncomfortable. Just listening. Briggs exhaled slowly. "I walked into that diner and made assumptions." He glanced briefly toward Ranger. "Turns out your dog had better instincts than I did." Ethan looked down toward Ranger briefly. "He usually does." Briggs laughed once under his breath. Small. Honest. Then silence settled between them for a second. Comfortable somehow. Not awkward. Ranger rested quietly against Ethan's leg while snow drifted lazily through diner lights. Finally Briggs asked softly, "You military?" Ethan hesitated. "Used to be." "What branch?" Ethan looked briefly toward the storm-dark highway. "Navy." Briggs nodded slowly. "Figures." Then after a pause he added quietly, "You handled situations like tonight before, huh?" Ethan shrugged once. "Enough. No details. No stories. No bragging." But Briggs noticed something then. The way Ethan scanned exits automatically. The way Ranger moved without commands. The calmness under pressure. People did not learn that overnight. Martha suddenly called out from across the lot. "Ethan." He turned slightly. She hurried over holding his heavy winter coat folded neatly in her arms. "You forgot this," she said softly. Then her voice cracked unexpectedly. "And thank you." Ethan took the coat carefully. "Everybody got out," he said simply. Martha shook her head. "Because of you." Then she looked toward Ranger. "Because of him." Nearby, several customers quietly nodded in agreement. Even the loud customer from earlier stood awkwardly near the patrol cars looking deeply uncomfortable. No anger remained now. Only embarrassment. Ranger lifted his head slowly, watching snow fall through flashing lights while distant sirens faded into the Colorado night. For the first time since entering the diner, nobody looked afraid of the quiet man beside him anymore. And somehow, Ethan looked even less comfortable with that than he had with suspicion. The storm finally began loosening its grip on Cedar Ridge sometime after midnight. Snow still covered sidewalks and truck roofs, but the sharp wind had softened into something quieter, gentler somehow, as if even winter itself had decided the town had already been through enough for one night. Cedar Ridge Diner remained closed behind yellow caution tape, while emergency crews continued inspecting damaged pipes and worn utility systems inside. Nobody had been hurt. Those words repeated quietly through town before sunrise. Nobody had been hurt. And strangely, almost every version of the story somehow began the same way. The dog knew first. Ethan Walker would have preferred none of it. By morning he had already disappeared back toward the small cabin near Pine Ridge Trail, with Ranger resting in the passenger seat of his old pickup truck. Snow crunched beneath worn tires while early sunlight slipped softly through pine branches. Ethan said almost nothing during the drive. Ranger rested quietly beside him, occasionally glancing toward the window while small clouds drifted from his breath in the cold cab. Peace had returned. Mostly. Yet something felt unfamiliar now. Ethan could feel it the way people in small towns always eventually sense change before seeing it. Cedar Ridge had noticed him, and Ethan had spent years trying not to be noticed at all. Back in town, however, forgetting the night proved impossible. Martha Collins stood inside the temporary coffee station volunteers had set up beside the hardware store while repairs on the diner began. Every customer arriving asked the same question first. How is Ranger? Even Officer Daniel Briggs heard it repeatedly during morning patrol. Gas station clerks, elderly couples, school crossing volunteers. Somehow the quiet man and his dog had become the only thing anyone wanted to talk about. Briggs stood inside the police station break room, holding coffee he had forgotten to drink. Earlier that morning, one firefighter handed him the final incident report. Confirmed gas leak near aging utility pipes. Dangerous pressure buildup. Estimated escalation window, less than 30 minutes. Briggs had stared at the paper longer than necessary. 30 minutes. Maybe less. He remembered Ethan standing calmly near the parking lot, saying only 2 words. He knew. Briggs had spent half the night replaying earlier moments inside the diner. The assumptions, the suspicion, the way Ethan remained respectful even after being treated unfairly, the way Ranger warned them long before anyone else noticed danger. Around noon, Briggs drove toward Pine Ridge Trail without fully deciding why. Maybe guilt, maybe gratitude, maybe both. Meanwhile, inside town, something unexpected happened. Lily Harper walked into Martha's temporary diner station, holding a printed photograph. It showed Ranger standing calmly outside beneath flashing lights while snow fell around him. Somebody from inside the diner had captured it during the evacuation. Lily smiled softly. We should frame it, she said. Martha looked at the picture for a long moment. No, she answered quietly, then smiled. We should hang it in the diner when we reopen. Near them, Kevin looked up from sweeping melted snow near the entrance. Put something underneath it, he said. Martha raised an eyebrow. Like what? Kevin thought for a second before smiling. He knew before we did. Nobody argued. Because somehow everybody understood exactly what that meant. That afternoon, the little girl from the diner returned with her father, carrying something wrapped in paper. For the dog, she explained shyly. Inside sat homemade peanut butter treats, shaped like tiny bones. Her father laughed softly. She insisted. By evening, more people quietly dropped things off near Martha's counter. Dog toys. Handwritten thank you notes. Even a warm blanket somebody said looked perfect for a German shepherd. None of it felt performative. Nobody called news stations. Nobody made speeches. It felt smaller than that. More human. Like gratitude finally catching up to a town too busy to notice kindness before it arrived quietly. At the cabin near Pine Ridge Trail, Ethan spent the afternoon repairing an old porch railing while Ranger rested nearby, watching snow melt from tree branches. The world felt still again. Familiar. Safe. Until headlights appeared near sunset. Ethan looked up slowly. Ranger lifted his head too, but stayed calm. Officer Daniel Briggs stepped from his patrol vehicle, holding something awkwardly in one hand and uncertainty written clearly across his face. He looked less like a police officer now and more like someone trying to figure out how to say something overdue. Ethan rested his hammer against the porch rail, but said nothing. Ranger stood slowly beside him. Calm. Watchful. Briggs stopped near the edge of the yard, exhaling lightly into the cold air. Hope I am not bothering you, he said quietly. Ethan shook his head once. No, Briggs hesitated before glancing down toward Ranger. Actually, he said awkwardly, I think most of the town wanted me to deliver something. Ranger tilted his head slightly, while evening light settled softly across the quiet mountain road. Evening settled quietly across Pine Ridge Trail, while the last light of winter faded behind snow-covered mountains. The kind of Colorado sunset that made everything feel softer for a few minutes before darkness arrived. Ethan Walker stood near the porch rail he had been repairing, sleeves rolled slightly despite the cold, weathered hands resting against worn wood. Ranger remained beside him, calm now, watching Officer Daniel Briggs with the steady patience only dogs seemed capable of carrying into every moment. Briggs shifted awkwardly near the truck, holding a paper bag in one hand and something wrapped carefully beneath his arm. Honestly, he admitted quietly, I think the whole town wanted an excuse to thank you without making it weird. Ethan looked toward him briefly. Town does not owe me anything. Briggs smiled faintly. Funny thing is, everybody keeps saying the same thing about you. He stepped closer and crouched slightly toward Ranger first. Mind if I? Ethan nodded once. Ranger sniffed Briggs's hand before allowing a careful scratch behind one ear. The German shepherd leaned slightly into it, surprising Briggs enough to laugh softly under his breath. Guess I finally passed inspection. Ethan looked almost amused. Almost. Briggs handed over the paper bag. These are apparently from half the town, he said. Inside sat homemade dog treats shaped like bones, a folded knitted blanket, and handwritten thank you cards from people Ethan barely recognized. One card from the little girl at the diner simply read, "Thank you for listening to your dog." Another carried shaky handwriting from Frank. "You saved an old fool from staying too long in the back room." Ethan stood quietly for a moment holding the bag while cold evening wind moved gently through pine trees. He had spent years becoming invisible, helping quietly, leaving before gratitude could catch up. Somehow Cedar Ridge had caught him anyway. Briggs finally held out the other object tucked beneath his arm. A leather dog collar. Dark brown. Strong stitching. Simple but carefully made. A small metal tag rested against it, catching the last bit of sunlight. Ethan looked down at it without speaking. Briggs rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Town hardware store owner made it, he explained. Everyone pitched in. Ethan turned the small tag carefully between his fingers. For simple words engraved neatly across polished metal. The one who knew first. Ranger tilted his head slightly, as if recognizing attention belonged somewhere near him. Ethan lowered himself slowly to one knee beside the dog. Quietly, carefully, he slipped off Ranger's old weathered collar and replaced it with the new one. The metal tag shifted softly in the evening light. Ranger sat patiently through the entire thing before nudging Ethan gently with his nose once it was finished. Briggs looked away briefly, pretending not to notice how unexpectedly emotional the moment felt. "There is one more thing," he said after a second. Ethan looked up. Briggs exhaled slowly. "I owe you a real apology." The wind moved softly between them. No traffic. No sirens. Just the sound of pine branches shifting somewhere above. "I saw the coat," Briggs admitted quietly. "The silence. The dog. I made assumptions." Ethan said nothing. Briggs looked down briefly. "Truth is, I thought I was protecting people." Ethan rested one hand lightly against Ranger's neck, then nodded once. "You were." Briggs blinked slightly. "After everything?" Ethan looked toward the fading mountains. Hard to blame somebody for trying to keep people safe. No bitterness. No scorekeeping. Just understanding. Somehow that felt heavier than anger would have. Briggs laughed softly under his breath. "You know, most people would not have handled things that way." Ethan shrugged once. Most people had not worked beside him. He glanced toward Ranger. Ranger rested peacefully near the porch now, new collar catching traces of sunset, while distant birds settled into trees for the night. After a long pause, Briggs asked quietly, "Navy, huh?" Ethan nodded once. "Long time ago. Special operations?" Briggs asked carefully. Ethan looked out toward the woods again before answering. "Long enough ago not to matter anymore." Briggs understood enough not to push further. Some stories belonged to silence. Before leaving, he stopped near the porch steps. "Diner reopens in 2 weeks," he said. "Martha wants you there." Ethan gave no promise. Briggs smiled anyway. Whole town kind of expects Ranger now. Ranger lifted one ear at the sound of his name. As headlights disappeared slowly down Pine Ridge Trail, evening settled fully around the cabin. Ethan sat quietly on the porch steps while Ranger rested beside him beneath the fading sky. Somewhere far below, Cedar Ridge glowed softly against the mountain valley, warm lights shining through the cold. For a long while neither moved. Neither needed to. Because sometimes healing did not arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived quietly on tired evenings, through second chances, honest apologies, and the steady loyalty of someone who knew danger long before anybody else ever saw it. And maybe the world remembered kindness longer than people expected.